What it is, y'all, it's your old boy Pilkin. We need to jump in here to Wistoria, chapter 36. This is interesting. So where we last left off, Will was essentially having kind of what we thought at the moment was a flashback. We'll more or less explain what's happening here. But to kick this off, well, they kind of do explain it here. Julius is like screaming at old girl. He's like, look, he's been out for 4 whole days. And she's like, he's in a dream. He's just having a good sleep. Don't mind him. And he's trying to figure this out. He's like, what are you talking about? He's asleep. And she's like, yeah, no, he's just working through some stuff. He has to do this to figure out his whole spiel. And essentially, Julius is like, none of this makes any sense. And she's like, well, normally I don't do this with mages. Normally I do this with mages, not swords. But, it is a thing. She even mentions, like, this is a way different method than what Finn would normally use, but I think it'll work in this particular situation. He's like, wait, what do you mean it'll think it'll work? You don't know it's going to work? No, I think it's going to work. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, I guess that's what it is, but what is he going to do, right? He's already out, and she's just kind of doing her thing, right? So she's like, he's got to find the intersection of wand and sword. That kind of thing we saw at the end of the last big story arc. And that's kind of what she's working towards right now. But when we get back in here, we realize that Will is kind of having this flashback to when he and Elfie were kind of in the woods. And they mention that there's some danger. There's not a whole lot going on, but Will's like figuring out basically that he's trying to figure out it, like, is this a flashback? Is he actually real? What's going on? But he quickly figures out that, okay, this is literally just a flashback. He's just super immersive flashback, but a flashback. But it's enough that it's real enough, I guess you could say, that Elfie is reacting to him reacting to the whole thing. So while it is a flashback, it kind of still plays out sort of in real time-ish. Things will change and things will be modified, but he still is immersed in it more or less. Because Elfie's still sitting here like, hey, you're spacing out. What do you think? What are you doing? And then I love the fact that she's like, you're thinking about other girls, aren't you? And I mean, they're like, what, 6 here or something like that? Like, obviously it's just a drastic overreaction. But it just goes to show you like how protective she is and how close they were. But essentially, they start getting back into the actual interaction, and he happens to realize, like, even back then, they were very close. They both have, like, huge feelings for each other. And, it's actually kind of cute. But as they're embracing here and as they're just kind of going about the rest of this flashback, they talk about there's, like, this monster off in the distance. And as they're kind of discussing this whole thing, you begin to slowly realize, like, this is a pivotal moment. This is a thing where it's not as innocent as it's kind of is letting on. And she mentioned as well, she said, like, don't worry, you have nothing to worry about. I'll protect you. So as the whole thing's going down, he happens to realize, he's like, oh yeah, back then, he was basically afraid of everything he says. Like, he was terrified of everything. So, Elfie kind of was more or less the I guess the shield and the sword and all the above. But as this kind of goes on, you realize, like, you see this figure here and you're like, oh, this is not as innocent as it looks. This is not playtime. And the two of them just kind of have a few interactions, and he's trying to basically figure out, like, what is going on here? What is my role here? What is happening? This is a flashback, but why is it important? And as this happens, that monster attacks. It basically looks like a werewolf almost. And as it's attacking, essentially they're both kind of knocked away here, and he's just trying to make heads or tails of why this is happening. Okay, first he's like, it's not a wolf. It's some kind of magical beast. It's definitely been spawned at some point. They mention that there's a war going on nearby, and maybe it's somebody's like familiar that got away, or like one of those magically spawned creatures that just kind of went berserk. And as everything's going on, Elfie kind of charges in, and she's like, more or less like, I got this, right? I'm going to use my magic. I'll take this thing down. But and I want to mention, like, this looks almost like her current, like, she's almost aged up here to we were like current age. It's just really interesting. But she starts unleashing this magical barrage here. And Will is kind of like, wait, this is not a good thing. Like, what happens essentially right here is as she's unleashing this barrage, you notice it kind of looks like they've kind of turned around, because this monster can reflect all of those magical attacks back on the user. So you kind of see like this close up here where the ice is about to take her out, and he is able to like hit her and like, well, I say hit her, but kind of like knock her out of the way at the very last possible second before she's actually able to get hit. And he's imploring her, like, you run away, get out of here. This is not, you can't beat this foe. And she's like, I'm not afraid. This is not going to be the end of me. This doesn't even hurt. And she's adamant, like, I have to protect you, Will. I've got this. Don't worry about it. And he's starting to realize, like, this is not a situation that's going to end well for her, because this is not a foe that she can take on. And she's still got that childlike innocence, and, she hasn't quite figured out that what she's doing isn't really working. And you kind of see here all those blasts that are kind of doubling back on her. And as everything bears down on her, Will is just like continually having to like knock her out of the way. And it almost looks like she's like bleeding here. Like she's been hit pretty good. So essentially, Will's at an impasse here. What is he going to do? How is he going to handle the situation? Now, bear in mind, this is still a flashback of sorts. Now, while he's able to change, I mean, it's like a dream, essentially, because he's able to change things and manipulate things. But he is able to have some kind of some kind of a positive influence on the outcome. But there's still a minimal amount he can do. He's like, how am I supposed to handle the situation? And that's when this mystery figure is like awaken. And you see like he's having a reaction here to this. And he's like, my flesh, it burns as if my entire body's exploded. And you see all of this happening here. This is that Whis. This is that magic that she was talking about. This is him like basically losing it, losing control, and all of the restrictions or all the walls are going down. And he's like, now I remember our adventure did not end there. And then he just gets up, and this almost looks like when he took out the Mage Slayers and all that. This is when he like really let go in that prior arc. And as he's approaching, you can see he's starting to basically form all that kind of magical mist around him. He is a different, his entire personality has 180. This is a part of his mind that essentially is just gone feral, and he has somehow managed to kind of like unlock this at a very, very early age, purely out of a necessity, so to speak. This isn't something that he's been able to trigger, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to figure out what causes, what makes him tick. How can we manually trigger this? And he's like, he's starting to realize that's what happened here. Like, this is what they're trying to do. This is what they're trying to get at. They're trying to comprehend how this happened, why this happened, so on and so forth. And yeah, it mentions here that created this sword. But essentially, this is all just essentially the very first time any of this has ever happened, and he doesn't even seem to remember any of this going down. And that's when Elfie kind of forms this ice sword, and they kind of go into battle together, just like we saw in that prior arc. That scene was almost perfectly emulated in the previous arc when they took out the Mage Slayers. So this whole thing is pretty wild. And you notice that attack looks extremely similar to what we've seen before. And they kind of just pass out after the fact, which explains why he doesn't remember it. And they're like, this is it. This is your magic. And they're like, this is where it all began. And essentially, this kind of like culminates the end of his, I guess, vision quest, so to speak. But this is what Serdwin was basically trying to acquire. This is what she wanted. She wanted him to remember how this felt, how this all went down. And finally, he wakes up. And he's like, you've been out for 6 days, dude. This dude has been out for basically a week on this vision quest. Also, let's mention that Kiki finally looks like her anime counterpart, which is really interesting. I do feel like I would, let me know in the comments if you guys want to see kind of a manga breakdown between the first few chapters and the latest few chapters, because I do feel like now the artist's art has definitely kind of like come into its own and is way better than it was in the very beginning. Let's bear in mind too that this is a rookie artist. That's not a slam on them whatsoever. That's just a thing I happen to notice here. Like the art has definitely matured over the past few years of this release. So if you guys want to see a breakdown on that, let me know, and I will definitely make that happen. But he's like, you need to get dressed, and we need to move on. And she's like, Serdwin comes in. She's like, so you located the source of your magic? And he's like, yep. And essentially, she's like, cool, you're going to need that. That is your new tool. And she's like, go and take your power and write yourself a story of wand and sword. And that is literally where this chapter leaves off. We are now, will he be able to unlock this every single time reliably by himself? Only time will tell. Only time will tell. But it seems like he now kind of understands and comprehends where this power comes from and what he needs to do. And this is a look of confidence, too. This is a look we don't often see from him, with the exception of when he's in the dungeon and he just goes all out. So, that is chapter 36. We'll be jumping into chapter 37, and we are very, very quickly catching up to current on this. So, let me know what you guys thought in the comments as always. Share this video out. If you know anybody that's been liking the anime and they want more information on this, tell them to check out the video. Share it with them. I'll be back with more coming up here on Wednesday.